Hello, everybody. Welcome. We are so glad that you're here. My name is Amy Hanreddy, and I am a professor of special education at California State University, Northridge. And I guess I'll call myself the facilitator because I don't like the word chair of our communication access work group. So this is a communication access work group within TASH. So we are part of the national organization, and we have several goals as part of our work group. So one is to promote dedication of the interest of communication access within the TASH organization, and make sure that AAC users and those who need additional supports related to communication have full access within everything that the organization does. We also have as a goal the promotion of evidence-based and ethical practices related to communication access beyond the organization. So our goal is to disseminate very broadly those practices, and we do that. We've done that through workshops, through sharing information, through partnership with our TASH parent organization in sharing information more broadly. We also support advocacy related to communication access and have partnered with other national and statewide organizations that are dedicated to communication access. We provide letters of support and, again, promotion of the interests of AAC users and those who benefit from additional support related to communication. As we begin this first of this 4-part series, I just really want to emphasize that everything that we do is done incredibly collaboratively within this work group. So we have a few members who are here who are not our presenters today that I just wanted to highlight for a second. So one of those is Judy Bailey, if you want to just kind of wave, Judy. And Judy Bailey is a long time, she precedes me in this work group, as does Sandy McLennan. Sandy, do you want to wave also? And then also Adi Buczynski, who is one of our newest work group members and is going to be helping us with the chat today and some of the other logistics. So I want to thank you all for being here. And then I'm going to now turn it over to Pascal Cheng, who's going to lead us throughout the majority of this session.
Thanks, Amy. So I'm Pascal.
I wanted to say one more thing,
okay.
Because I just remembered. And that is that TASH has a resolution on the right to communicate, and I'm just going to put a link to that in the chat that really represents the importance that TASH places upon the role of communication access within everything we do. Sorry, Pascal.
No problem. So welcome, everybody. So my name is Pascal Cheng. I'm coming to you from Burlington, beautiful Burlington, Vermont, where we're at the height of spring after winter. And I'm a communications specialist for an agency called Howard Center, and I provide support and training for children and adults around a variety of communication methods and needs. And I'm here with 2 people from the West Coast, Ryan Duncanwood and Grant Blasko, who are going to introduce themselves. And we have debates in our group about which is better, the West Coast or the East Coast. But I'm going to defer to the West Coast guys now. So I think, Ryan, you're going to do an introduction, I believe.
Hi, my name is Ryan Duncanwood. Hi, my name is Ryan Duncanwood. I'm a Shasta People First member, SEP board member and TASH member and advocate, State Council RAC member, and California Democratic Assembly District member.
Is that your full introduction, Ryan?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, great. And then we'll turn it over to you, Grant.
Hi, I'm Grant. I am an autistic AAC user from Bellevue, Washington. Right now, I'm dual enrolled in Bellevue High School and Bellevue College. I am really enjoying my psychology and sociology classes. Disability advocacy work for non-speakers is a passion of mine. I have been a National Attached Communication Access Work Group member for 4 years, and now I am an advisory board member for Communication First. I'm currently co-designing course for communication classroom support considerations with NYU. This summer, I will attend Aspen's Autism Campus Inclusion (AUCHI) Leadership Academy.
Great. Is that your introduction? Okay, it looks like that's, thanks a lot, Grant. So Amy, do you want to go to the, yeah. So what we're going to cover today, there are 4 parts to today's webinar. The first part, we're going to talk about the importance of communication access, and Ryan and Grant have a lot to share about that topic. And we're going to get a little also into what does communication access mean. The second part's going to focus on what are the barriers to access and what are some barriers that all of you might be able to take some steps to reduce in your day-to-day life with people who use AAC. And then the third part will be focused on what are some first steps that we can all take to increase communication access for people that we support. And then the last part, we'll have small group discussion, breakout sessions. So that's what we'll be doing for our time today. And as I think Donald said, if throughout the presentation, if people have questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat box. Okay, Amy, do you want to go to the next slide? So this is a quote from Ryan: "Communication access is my life. I communicate daily with my staff, and I'm on numerous boards and such." And I know, Ryan, you're a very active political person, and so that access is really critical to that involvement that you have, that work that you do.
Yeah.
Great. And Grant, you have some things to share about the importance of communication access. So will you be speaking those on your device, Grant?
Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Laugh out loud.
He said yes, 1 second. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Judy Bailey to everyone, 12.
No, sorry. Hold on 1 second, Pascal. Sorry, we thought we had more time.
So we will be doing a whole other session on communication access in the digital world. And
Yes,
I think
laugh out
that we are modeling that that wait time now. So I just wanted
There's
to
no apologies in the virtual world.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Grant.
Why not? All right.
Communication access is essential to living a full life. Communication is often described as wants and needs. When I watch a typical getting started with AAC presentation, the discussion may be around how to start with greetings, or motivating items to ask for, or more and more, around core words. There's often talk about what level of technology to start with, or how to assess people to put them into a category of what they can do, and then match technology features to their current skills. Communication access, to me, is much bigger than this. It is about human connection. In order to participate in my own self-care, my family dynamics, getting coffee from Starbucks, advancing my own education, representing and advocating for myself at a meeting, catching up with a friend, and pursuing my future dreams, I need access to communication, and I need it 24/7. Not being able to communicate with speech affects every single aspect of my interaction with the world, every day. Think about your average teen. We're all trying to find both an individual identity for ourselves, as well as group belonging. Without a voice on command, I cannot easily join a conversation. I might have the perfect quip in my head, but I can't get the timing right for joking around. I can't walk and talk with a friend at the same time, and I constantly feel that others might be too impatient, or are just moving too fast to wait for me to contribute. These are all tough things to navigate as a teen, but I'm working on it. My autism and non-speaking status also affects my chances of ever driving, dating, or even being safe in my own community alone, and so many other aspects that a lot of speaking people take for granted. Even with my membership as a YT Scholar at U, a program for college-bound students with various disabilities, my inability to orally speak seemed to limit me much more than students with other significant challenges. That was a tough pill to swallow, and it caused my anxiety about the future to peak. Communication access, as Pascal will explain it, is about not only the technology we may need to use, but it is about the social structures in place that allow communication to happen. In the coming weeks, you will hear more about what communication partners can do to support people with communication needs. It is not just about teaching vocabulary and choosing the right device, but really about how we support someone to enter and stay in conversation. Communication access is about how comfortable you make someone feel. It is about telling them with your minds and hearts that you won't let them struggle alone, and that what they are trying to say is worth waiting for us to hear. Even though I am a strong communicator who has had the benefit of education, I am still quite aware of the likelihood that I can be dismissed unless I have some level of support for my communication access. I will talk about the barriers I still face soon, but as you listen to the presentation, I will ask that we remind ourselves again and again what communication access allows us to do every day, and stay committed to enabling it for others as much as possible.
Thank you, Grant. That was really wonderful. I think you
Yeah.
really, I'll let you finish here.
Reason. I do. This is watching the people in this audience. Dot. The reason I do this is watching the people in this audience. Learning. Saves us so much pain. Dot. Learning saves us so much pain.
Thank you, Grant. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Not.
Um,
Right. Now.
mm,
Not right now, laugh out loud.
Well, I know you're going to have some other things to share later, so great. Thank you. And you really, I think you gave a really complete kind of picture of what communication access is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that Grant kind of mentioned. And when people hear the word communication access, it could mean a number of different things. I'm going to talk about what some of those things might be and relate back to some of the things that Ryan and Grant said. I think the first thing is to just keep in mind, and Tash has a resolution on the right to communicate, and this is another right to communicate statement called the Universal Declaration of Communication Rights. But basically, communication is looked at as a basic human civil right. So when we talk about communication access, it's access to a right that all people should have. And so it's not something that is a privilege or something that people need to earn or something that is a choice. It's people absolutely need to have this right. So Amy, do you want to go to the next slide? And so the TASH resolution on the right to communicate says this is both a basic human right and the means by which all of the rights are realized. All people communicate and are presumed to have an active interest in communicating their decisions and choices. Yeah. So this is really the underlying principle with communication access, the right to communicate. I'm going to go to the next slide, Amy. So in the right to communicate resolution, they define access as assessment to aid in choosing a suitable method, training the method, access to equipment and technology, access to skilled and trained communication partners, ongoing evaluation of progress, and adequate funding for long-term training, support, and equipment. So we're going to focus in particular today on the access to the actual equipment and technology that you need and the role of people in helping you gain that access. And these other areas are definitely, we're going to cover partners in a later training. And then some of these are going to be more systems issues related to access. So go to the next slide. So I thought this was actually, this kind of goes along with what both Grant and Ryan were saying, is that AAC is really empowers people and that frees people. It frees people to express themselves. And if you look at the last statement here, AAC devices and aids are part of a person's personal space. Many AAC users see their devices aids as part of their body. So it's really an integral part of a person's identity and their voice. So it's really not something that we necessarily separate from the person. It's their voice, it's the way that they identify themselves. You can go to the next slide. So traditionally, we've often thought of access as physical. There's a physical access. So that's access to the use of equipment, the positioning, and the use of technology. So in this picture here, this young man, in order for him to physically access his device, he uses his head, and there's a head, he's wearing a head pointer that allows him to hit the keys on the device. He also might have the device positioned on his chair so that he can reach it, and then he might be positioned in his chair so that he's able to use his head. So typically that's what we often think about as access on this physical level. I'm going to go to the next. And here's another example where this person is accessing their device by using that red switch because they're not able to use the touch screen. So I need another way to select the buttons on their device. Would go to, so don't know how many people remember the film My Left Foot, but it was a really pretty popular film back about 20 years ago, and it was a story of an Irish poet named Christy Brown, and it was called My Left Foot because he learned to communicate using initially a piece of chalk on with his foot, and then later he used pencils and a paintbrush. In this case, he's drawing. And then you want to go to the next slide. He went on to actually use he started writing using a pencil, but then he went on to use a piece of technology, a typewriter. But in the picture on the left, what enabled him to get access to writing and typing on a typewriter was that his mother really believed that he was a smart kid, and because she believed that, she gave him the materials, gave him the access to communication that he needed to get an education. So his mother played a very key role enabling that to happen. So one of the themes of today is that people who support AAC users have a very important role in that access. Go to the next. So here's another movie scene. It's from the Stephen Hawking biopic. And in this scene, when he first loses his speech, it was not using electronic technology. He was using an eye gaze board. So in this scene, his wife is holding up this eye gaze board, and he's selecting letters by using his eyes. So she played a very important role in giving him a way to communicate when he lost his voice. Go to the next slide. Later on, he got access to computer technology to communicate, and he was probably one of the first people that had very sophisticated technology. So his physical access actually was a switch that he activated on with his cheek. Go to the next slide. So we often refer to the people who support AAC users, and this might be a familiar term, as either a facilitator, more commonly communication partner. So the one definition of a partner is one who makes things easier. People who facilitate communication are familiar partners who do things that enable interaction to occur. So in this scene here, this young man has a communication device on his wheelchair, and his partner probably positioned his device so that he can use it. And his partner also is recognizing that he's out in the community someplace and there are opportunities for interaction to occur. So he's setting up the device so that the young man can use it. And without doing that, the young man might not be able to access his device. So we can go to the next slide. So I wonder so the question, what is this child partner doing to support his access to communication? I'm wondering if people can just put some comments in the chat box about just some of the things that you notice. This child has a lot of different equipment and devices. Okay, modeling. So just throw some ideas of what you notice in the chat box. Encouraging. Affirming. Okay, drawing attention with her, using authentic engagement. Patiently waiting, prompting. Scaffolding. Making it fun. Yeah, there is a lot of interaction. I think all of you the words that you're using really relate to the interaction that she's having with him that's getting him engaged. So he can have all this wonderful equipment and technology, but without her involvement, doing all the things that she's doing in terms of prompting, engaging him, interacting with him, he might not be able to use his communication device as successfully as he is. So again, the partner has a very important role in enabling that access to happen. Go to the next slide. So we're kind of in a now, probably in the last 10 years, a new frontier with communication access. And that is that in the 21st century, we really have communication has moved beyond just communicating face to face with people, but also communicating virtually. And so there's this idea that people now have to have some level of digital literacy. And we're going to kind of talk more about this in our last workshop. But in order to really communicate effectively in the 21st century, you have to be able to do things like use email, text, do other kinds of activities that require using the internet or using some form of digital technology. And the key thing is that nowadays, in order for full participation in schools, in work, and involvement in your community, you really have to have access to the technology to enable you to do these virtual activities, and you have to develop the skills to use the technology. Do you want to go to the next slide? This is a friend of mine, Tracy Thresher, and Tracy does a lot of presenting and speaking at different conferences. And so he talks about the role of technology in his work. He says, I need technology to give my voice to communicate. It's important that I have more than one option to use. Letterboards and telekeys, computers, with voice output software, devices that speak. My latest moving into the future, big time voice, the iPad. Go to the next slide. And Tracy goes on to say the iPad is really the most important tool in my toolbox when it comes to accessing communication and working. It's the typing with the iPad that gives me the freedom to communicate and present to a crowd. So Tracy with his iPad can be hooked into a projector and his words can be projected on the screen, and then he can also type responses to questions in the audience. So it's absolutely critical to he's a really very active self-advocate, and so it's critical to his work to be able to have this technology. You can go to the next slide. So now we're going to have a parent talk about what communication access means for her daughter from a parent perspective. And this is Adiba Nelson.
Hi, my name is Adiba Nelson, and I am mom to a 12-year-old. Well, she'll be 12 in 3 days. Who knows, kids, they grow so fast. But my daughter Emery has been an AAC user since kindergarten. So since she was about 5, so for the last 6 to 7 years. And I will tell you that up until that point, we had established kind of our own method of communication, whether it was sign language or gesticulations, or just, you know your child, you know what they're trying to say based on how they're moving, where their eyes are going. So we had our very own method of communicating, which was working really well for us. But I also knew that when the time came for her to start school, that she was going to need more. I knew she was a smart kid, and this was going to be her time to let other people know. And so we started off with a very simple communication device, the iPad. And I'll tell you, I was definitely hesitant, I guess is the right word. I wanted her to have something to communicate at school with, but I was really concerned and had some anxieties around it replacing our communication. It had become so much a part of who we were and our relationship that I was a little bit reticent about having it in the home. And I actually wrote an entire article about it for the Huffington Post called My Daughter's Communication Device is Breaking My Heart, or My Daughter's Speech Therapy is Breaking My Heart, or something like that. And I talk about how nervous I was about having this new technology in our home, even though I knew that it was going to open up her world and help people understand her better and know who she is a little bit better. But the odd thing is that um, it didn't replace our method of communication at all. Truth be told, she rarely uses her communication device at home because she's so comfortable with what we have. When she does use it, it's typically when she's upset with me. And she has some very specific things she would like to say. But for the most part, she uses it at school and with her friends, and they have a great time and they understand her. Her teachers understand her, and it works out really, really well. Um, I have loved actually having the speech device in our home because of the fact that it opens up her ability to communicate so much. A really quick, funny story is that a couple of years ago, she wanted to have a sleepover. And so she kept asking me with her device if she could have a sleepover. And I kept telling her, no, we're not going to do that this weekend. We have plans next weekend. She didn't like my answer. And so she found some buttons on the device. And next thing I know, I'm hearing the word bench. And I'm like, bench, what are you talking about? Bench, what's a bench? And she pointed to me and I was like, I'm a bench. What? And then it clicked. She wasn't trying to say the word bench. She was trying to say the B word that sounds like bench. And one might think like, oh my gosh, that's really horrible. But really, it's pretty amazing. Having this device just opened up her communication. She was able to appropriately or inappropriately, depending on how you look at it, express how she was feeling in that moment. I didn't know whether to laugh or to ground her. I didn't ground her. I just laughed and said, that's really amazing that you put that together. I didn't even know that word was on your talker. Don't ever use that word with me again. But just to see how much it had opened that door for her was really comforting. Now, I can say that this last go round of trying to get our talker or communication device, AAC device, has been a challenge because of state and legislature and insurance. And those can all really be big hurdles to overcome when you're trying to get the things that your child needs. And it took me getting media involved and getting an attorney involved. And sometimes it happens. Honestly, this is the first time that has happened in the 7 years of her having a device. I want to say to the parents watching this, do not be afraid to take things up the ladder if you need to. If people are mad at you, they're mad at you. It doesn't matter. You're doing this for your child, for your children, and they can be all up in their feelings, for lack of a better way of putting it. They can be in their feelings about it if they are upset that you are getting the media involved. The way I see it is, if you didn't want me to get the media involved, you probably should have handled it the first time. So that can be a barrier, is when insurance doesn't want to do this thing and the state organization doesn't want to do this thing and the legislature says another thing. Don't be afraid to climb that ladder. Don't be afraid to get whomever you need to get involved to get your child what they need. Don't be afraid to do that, because at the end of the day, it's you. You're the end of the line for your child. So we now have our communication device. It took us 2 years to get a working device, and she's right back to using her device when she's upset with me and saying things that she probably shouldn't say. But at the end of the day, that's actually a really beautiful thing. So that's my story. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Adiba. Really wonderful perspective from her. I wanted to actually pose a question to everybody. There was a real, as she described, as a real shift in Adiba's thinking about her daughter's communication access and the role in technology. And I'm wondering if people want to, in the chat box, put down what were some of the things that caused her or enabled her to change her perspective from the time that she wrote that article, "My daughter's speech therapy is breaking my heart"? People want to, in the chat box, just put down what are some of those things were. She definitely went through a shift in how she thought about things. Liberation for her daughter's personality idea. That's a great word. Seeing her child able to express herself. Having a better relationship with her child. What was she seeing in school? I love how she talked about seeing her daughter's unique voice, you know, the use of the word bench. What about, there was an increased socialization, right, in school. It became really important for that. Yeah, I really appreciated how she was able to step out of her own needs and look at what her daughters need in terms of connection with other people. And that allowed her to make that shift. And that's kind of a message for a lot, realizing her daughter could use more than one mode of communication. And that's kind of one of the most important steps towards people getting more access, is people around them doing some kind of shift in their thinking. And Grant said, "I think I love listening to Adiba and hope to meet Emery someday because she sounds great." Yeah, hopefully you will, Grant. Okay, great. Can we go to the next slide, Amy? So we're going to talk a little bit about barriers, and Adiba Nelson mentioned what some of those barriers are. So there's a lot of different types of barriers, and a number of them are on a larger systems level. So issues with funding, available of technology resources, availability of AAC specialists. That's a real issue in Vermont. We're a very small state, and we don't have a lot of people that can do AAC evaluations and technical support. Organizational support coming from your agency or school, training. And then one of the biggest barriers is attitudinal. I'm going to talk more about that later, but that really is the place that where all of us can get some change going. So I'm going to, both Grant and Ryan have some perspectives on barriers that they've seen in their own experience. And Ryan had several here. For one is when my technology doesn't work. And then I think, Ryan, you'd said when staff have to fix the problem, and I'm sure maybe the availability of staff to fix the problem, and when my device is updating Windows. So yeah, if something goes wrong with your technology, that's a real barrier. And then how are you going to get support for that? Is that right, Ryan? Does that capture it? I don't know if your camera is on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that capture it? Or if you want to add anything? Well, if you want to add anything, feel free to put it in the chat. And then Grant has some things to share about barriers.
When we talk about barriers, I want to share that there are many. Barriers of attitudes are probably the biggest one in new settings. School curriculum and collaborative quick activities are another area where teachers don't always realize just how long it takes for me to do the same things other students do easily. Another barrier is the amount of energy it takes for me to manage my emotions and troubleshoot all day long. There's grief related to having to handle everybody else's discomfort with AAC and making adjustments to their regular ways of interacting. These systemic barriers are great enough that I think people should try to be an AAC user for a while, and then let me know how many times you think about abandoning the experiment. Laugh out loud. Seriously though, I am hoping it would create a new respect for what it is like, and also a creative spark for how to help in every setting. The fact is, I'm still trying to understand my own life expectations and limitations. I think sometimes people don't think these things are the worries of AAC users, because maybe we don't talk about it enough. And that is frustrating because I think it would be nice to get some credit for the emotional strength it takes to manage how much this stuff bothers me sometimes. On top of all of this, sometimes the way we learn to communicate is under scrutiny. Proving myself worthy every day has become the norm. I bring it up because inclusion is supposed to be about acceptance of difference, but some of us have dealt with an added bar that seems so unjust. It does not seem to matter to some that we have done so much work to overcome challenges moving to independence gradually, going back and filling in all the general education skills we may have missed because of segregation. I wonder when and if all our efforts will ever be enough. I have personally won over many skeptical minds, and have many friends that have too. But the threat of being discriminated against for my disability is still very real every day. My work with TASH and communication first is centered around the idea that discrimination related to communication disability is very much like other forms of inequity that have been addressed through the civil and disability rights movements. All that being said, I think one of my biggest strengths is my ability to overcome my struggles to advocate for myself and others. I might feel great stress, but in advocacy in educational settings, I find a way to bring my skills together when I need to, and hopefully it will get easier over time to say more whenever I want. In this way, the barriers become the motivation for progress. Yes. And I want to. Also, say that this task of access is always on my mind. So, stay tuned! Exclamation mark. Yes, and I want to also say that this task of access is always on my mind, so stay tuned.
Thank you, Grant. I think you point out just the barriers are often things that are created maybe unnecessarily by other people or systems, and that you have to fight that much harder to get access. So I'm sure you'll have more to say about this issue. Amy, do you want to go to the next slide? So oftentimes we ask, well, what can we do to increase communication access for someone that we know or support? And I'm not going to say a lot about assessment, just to say that oftentimes we think we have that a person needs a formal AAC evaluation, which is important to get. But in the meantime, while that is the work that's in process, and sometimes that it takes time to get that set up, there are things that we can do in the way of informal assessment. And we can also look at the skills and attitudes of partners, and we can look at what the communication needs and opportunities are in different environments. I'm going to share a tool that anyone can use to do informal assessment. But the first thing to think about in the area of attitude, and Grant used the word equity or inequity, and this is kind of a way to think about levels of communication access from unequal to just communication access. So in the upper left-hand column, if you want to think about the tree with the apples as a community where there's social interaction, both kids are trying to get interaction. They're trying to get an apple, and one kid can get the apple and sort of catch it. The other kid is waiting for an apple to happen, or waiting for social interaction. So equality might be that both kids are in school and they both get computers. However, the kid on the left is able to get to the apples, get to the social interaction, whereas the other kid, even though he or she might have the computer, is not able to, the computer is not set up for the kid to use it, or he doesn't have the support. And then if you go to the upper right, equity is where both kids have the technology, and that the technology is set up for them to use. The kid on the right has the technology, has a higher ladder so they can reach the apples. But if you look, that's equity in terms of the devices, but not equity as far as opportunity. And it's because there's less apples on the right-hand side. So we may get to step 3 in terms of equity with devices and technology, but where things may not be equal is access to opportunity. And so that's the step that many of us can take to help people gain more communication access, even if they have technology. So go to the next slide. So this is a graphic, and it's called the cycle of presumed competence. And it's kind of a cycle that many people who use AAC deal with every day. And both Grant and Ryan have mentioned this, how attitudes around them affect their communication. So if you look at the top, perception drives expectation. About a month ago in our agency, we had a community forum, and the speakers in that forum were people who were refugees from other countries, and they were describing their communication experiences. And one man said that he was actually quite fluent in English, but he had an accent, and he described trying to go for job interviews and people perceiving that because he had an accent that he was less capable. And so what happened is, even though he was a very well-educated person, had good experience in his native country, he often did not get jobs because the perception of his abilities was based on his accent. So of course, with that perception came, if you go to the right, expectation drives opportunity. People had low expectations, and then he had low opportunity for employment. And so as a result, it kind of, the cycle kind of reinforces itself. So the same thing happens for people who are non-speaking, where the perception is they don't have anything to say. So people don't expect them to say anything, and then they provide a lot less opportunity, then the person's not able to gain communication skill. And so it's kind of, people get caught up in this cycle unless the perceptions change. So you can go to the next slide. So how we can work on perception, it really starts with the team. And I'm not going to go through each one of these questions, but just to say that oftentimes there's a lot of work that can be done on a team level if you look at these questions that will help everybody basically get on the same page and make a commitment to supporting a person's communication. And I think you have this PowerPoint so you can go through the individual questions. We can go to the next slide. And so part of what teams do is they develop goals, whether it's an IEP goal or whether it's a goal for an adult on their life plan. And just to quickly say that a goal on the left is not learning to use a communication system or learning to use a device. It's just a way to reach your goal. So it's a means to do it. So when we really talk about a goal, it's really looking at whether a positive change is happening in a person's life. Does it increase their independence? Does it empower them to make choices and decisions? So Tracy Thresher was talking about how he was able to meet his goals for work. You know, he was able to present, he was able to participate in his community and advocate. So his communication goal was being met because of that use of that technology. So go to the next slide. So just a quick thing is that oftentimes when we talk about a communication goal, we often talk about someone maybe learning something new. And maybe it's not always learning something new. It's taking a skill that the person already has and being able to have them be able to do it, either initiate it on their own or be able to use the skill in a lot of different situations. And just an example, I know a lot of people, all of us, go and order food at restaurants. And so many people I know are able to make their choice for what they want. But when they get to the restaurant, their partner will often speak their order for them. So the person has the skill, whether it's using their device or speaking, to say what they want, but they're not able to initiate it or to do it in different kinds of restaurants. So an initial step might be to help that person, support them to be able to use the skill that they have more broadly and to be able to initiate. And that in itself is often much more empowering and gives people a feeling of success because they're actually using a skill they have. So go to the next slide. So some of you may be familiar with what a communication dictionary is, and I use this on an everyday basis. And I'm going to actually, Amy, can you go to the next slide? So basically, sometimes people refer to this as a communication chart, but you can use this as a form of informal assessment. And basically, there's either 3 or 4 columns to it, but in this one has 4. But basically, the first 2 columns on the left is what the person does and maybe where or when it's happening. The we think it means column is people around the person interpreting what they think the person's communication action means and then what they need to do. And I'm just going to use the one on the top. SP is someone that I know, and he happens to live in a group home. And oftentimes he will, at dinner time, he will push his food away. And so most people who know him think that he doesn't like what's being made for dinner. And what started to happen is when we did the dictionary, is people began to think about, well, maybe we need to give him more choices for dinner. And then it went on to, well, maybe he needs to be more involved in planning the meals so that he actually has a meal that he wants. He has more control. And then it even went to the point of, well, maybe he'd like to order takeout sometime. Maybe he doesn't want to have the dinner that's made in the home. And the point about this is really how the thinking of people around this person really changed over time, is by doing something, this dictionary, and looking at what someone's action meant. They were able to start to think of alternative ways that they could help the person get more what they wanted. So you can use this dictionary, and the way that it works is that you, over a week or two period of time, the people who know a person will just jot down examples of when they're communicating, and then they'll put down on the left-hand column what the person does when it's happening, in the middle what it means, and then the third column would be how people should respond. And what this really helps with, one is that a couple things. One is that there'll be more consistency in how people respond to someone's act of communicating. It will be helpful for a new person who doesn't know the person. It's got to be very frustrating to have a new person who doesn't know when you're trying to communicate, and so they're not able to react appropriately. And then it identifies areas where maybe, in this case with this man who doesn't want his dinner, the typical dinner that's served, that it opens up an avenue for new options to be thought about. So it's a very useful tool to get started. So we can go on to the next slide. Keep going. Yeah, we're just gonna. So basically, I think the idea is that part of when you do the dictionary is partners realize they may have to change how they're interacting. So if someone is doing something like they don't like something, it means that people have to stop and listen and think of, maybe we need to create more opportunities for choice in this situation. So we can go to the next slide. And and so this quote, we need to turn our classroom into a language playground. We need to be celebrating and playing with language all day long, is that really communication, I think Grant, you said communication is 24/7. So we have to have that 24/7 mindset, and that there are opportunities throughout somebody's day, and to work at providing as many opportunities as possible. That's a really important first step. Let's go to the next slide. So this is one of the steps in terms of first steps that we all can do, and it's, so what you can do is with the input of the person, you can look at what kinds of activities a person does, what places do they go, how frequently they occur, what communication is needed to participate in doing the activity, and what activities are most motivating to a person. So you can kind of do an inventory, and then once you do that, you can go to the next slide. You can take something, I just took something very simple like going out to eat, and I generated a list of all the possible opportunities for communication. And it might not mean that the person does all of these, but it gives you a starting place, and it really helps open up more opportunities when you generate a lot of different ideas. And the part that's really important too that comes up is having conversation. A lot of times that's something that gets left out when you're thinking about opportunities, but that might be the most important one, because that's why many people go out to eat. So we're going to do an activity now where we're going to kind of take this idea of creating more opportunities, and we're going to take some specific everyday activities that people do, and we're going to break you up into breakout rooms. So I think what we're going to do is I think we're going to be doing 3 groups. Is that right?
Yes, I have the rooms ready to go. There'll be 2 breakout rooms, and then a third of the participants are just going to stay in the main room.
Okay. So yeah, so each of the groups, I think we're doing one group will get the activity grocery shopping, another will get the ticketed theater performance with an intermission, and the third will be playing a card game.
Yeah.
And so
and then
go ahead.
The steps on the left, I just put in the chat. So once we go into the breakout rooms, you'll all still have access to what the steps are. And then the 3 facilitators for the groups will have the guiding questions for your topic.
Okay, great. And so the main focus here will be taking each activity that the activity that your group is doing and generating ideas for opportunities for communication. So do you want to, So how long are we doing? Are we doing 10
I think
minutes?
probably about 10 minutes.
Yeah, 10 minutes. Okay. And so
I'll
the
put
And
a
I
timer
think
on.
that I think that Adi, your group is doing grocery shopping, am I right? And then Pascal is the theater performance,
Yeah.
and then my group is the card game. Okay,
okay,
great. All right, so Adi, I think you can open the breakout rooms when you're ready.
Hold on, just switching the. Okay. If you get a breakout room button, just click it. If you don't get a breakout room button, everything's fine. You're just in the group that's going to stay here.
Okay, looks like Sandy and I have the lucky group that gets to stay. So welcome to those of you who get to stay in the main room. I wonder, Sandy, do you just want to introduce yourself for a second? I know we just kind of had you wave earlier. Maybe you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sandy McLennan. I've been TASH member since the second year that the old original group existed, and I've always been particularly concerned about communication access.
Great. And so welcome. And Tabby, thanks for turning your camera on. It's always nice to be able to see people, especially as we're in a small group. Never required, but always appreciated, I think, as we have more of a discussion now. So the idea here, so Pascal talked a lot about opportunities, kind of creating the space and the role of a communication partner in helping to support those opportunities, as well as the logistics, the physical access, and being that really high quality support that all of our AAC users and people who need communication support, the supports that they need. And so what we were thinking for this group is that we could kind of just all, really try to think about one person. I don't know if we have any AAC users in our group, but I am guessing that most of you who joined because you maybe have somebody in your life, whether in a professional role or a personal role or a family member who would benefit from some increased access to communication supports. And so if you could all kind of like put that person in your head for a minute and think about them. And then we're going to think about the activity of playing a card game and how we could support communication access within that activity. So maybe our first really easy task, maybe it's not easy, is to choose, is there a card game that we know that we can agree on?
I'm going to suggest Uno, as I've had a lot of positive experiences with people with communication difficulties, challenges. But speak up.
I love that. Yeah. Anybody else have a strong opinion? Right. I'm a pretty competitive Uno player, so I'm on board with that. So thinking about people that you know, what are some things we might need to consider to support communication while we're playing our competitive, maybe less competitive, maybe it's just me, but our Uno game?
The one that comes to mind for me is how the ability for that person to express Uno when they get down to one card. That's my default. Like, I always lose Uno because I forget to say Uno. So what happens if a person isn't able to express that?
Great. I am taking notes here. How to indicate they are down to one card. It's a critical part of the game. And if you're competitive like me, that person doesn't win unless they say Uno when they're down to one card, right? Good. What are other considerations?
I think of it as a really social activity. So having the ability to comment like sucker, loser, gotcha, draw 4. So some of those sort of key phrases that go along with the game. Maybe
Yeah,
also phrases
what do you
like,
call that?
I don't
razzing?
understand.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
I call it like razzing, right? Like teasing, giving each other a hard time.
And I also think about phrases for clarification, like, I don't understand, or how does that work? Or tell me again the rules.
Great. Good. Other consideration. Really thinking about the people that you know, and what are some communication or interaction barriers that might come up during this game?
It looks like Kim put in the chat that a way for somebody to say what card they want to play if they also have motor issues.
Great. So I also think about, one of the things that Pascal kind of started with earlier in the presentation was thinking about how we're setting up the environment and how we're promoting access. So part of it is like the message and the things that people are able to express, right? Whether it's pointing or using a device or however they're expressing that. But there's also, in order to be able to do that, there's also some kind of environmental factors, right? And thinking about the people that you know, what are some considerations we might need to be making as their communication partners to make this a conducive environment to play this game in?
Lisa,
Lisa, it looks like you're talking.
Lisa, please unmute.
Lisa, I think you're talking, but you're muted.
Unmute, is that better?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm having like everybody sounds like they're in the bottom of the can right now. It's just my connection. But my daughter is also in a wheelchair, so we have to be at a table, and her communication device has to be close to her, and then we have to have a way that the cards can tilt up so that she can see them. And then we have some canned comments on the talker, like the colors. And she very sarcastically loves to tell the person to draw 4. So, she has that set on her device. So it's a kind of a razzy voice and, and all this kind of stuff. So we have to dial her down a little bit.
I'd like to meet her. She sounds cool.
She gave up and took off outside. So she's out and about.
I love it. I'm wondering, when you all are playing card games, and with people who are AAC users as well as people who are not, are there things that you talk about or have conversations about that are not about the game itself? Yeah, I see. Is it Tabby? Is saying games are generally social, so perhaps a way to share about what's going on in life, right? So sometimes, and again, everything is, we need to consider each unique person, right? But sometimes we, in trying to set somebody up to be successful, for a really great Uno game, we give them like one page or one set of comments or things to talk about that are all related to Uno, which could inadvertently limit the potential to talk about other things, right? Or, you know, maybe we're starting the game and I want to mention something that's coming up that I'm really looking forward to, which is what I might have as somebody with the privilege of using speech. That's something that I might just easily pivot to. And I wonder, I saw Adi's note that we only have a few minutes left. I also wonder about, you know these individuals you're thinking of really well. If they were playing this Uno game with other people, or if somebody else were supporting them, are there things related to communication access that maybe those that you know, but other people might not know, that you would need to remind them of or encourage them to consider? And what are some of those things that you might mention?
Maybe giving somebody time. Yeah, I think Tabby just mentioned it too, slowing down,
Okay.
giving time to process, waiting for a response. And maybe depending on, their receptive language, maybe using fewer syllables and, just shorter instructions.
Yeah, sometimes it can be overwhelming to give like a whole bunch of instructions at once, for example. Oh, I see our other group is coming back. All right, so I did take notes and I can maybe, Sandy, do you want to share for our group or do you want me to share for our group?
Go ahead, you've got the notes.
Okay, when we're ready.
I didn't realize I was, okay. So maybe since everybody's back, do we want to have the first group share what you talked about? Grocery shopping group.
Judy, do you mind doing this share out? Sorry, all my students are back in the room, so I'm all masked and it's there's a little bit of background noise. Judy, do you mind doing it?
You're on mute, Judy.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else could join in also. I took a few notes. We talked about going to the grocery store before you go, even planning the list of what you want. Or if you're standing in the produce aisle to say, what looks good? What shall we have? And planning it actually once you're there. You might want to try things at the deli and ask for samples. You might need to have someone come up to you and ask, where do you find something? How do you find something? And you might need a response there. Or you might have somebody overly helpful saying, wanting to help you all over the place and you want to decline the help. Or the interaction with the cashier and handling that, or asking for what kind of bag you want.
They don't give bags anymore.
I know. It depends on where you live. Yeah. Or, which item to choose if you have a choice between, brands or, produce or whatever. And then things that we also talked about, what to do in advance to prepare, and, maybe practicing in advance, things that the person might say, like, for instance, how do you decline? Do you want to decline help or not? Or getting the person used to what the kind of interactions they might need to to have or care to have. Did that kind of capture
Yeah,
it?
great. Yeah, yeah. I think that preparation beforehand, that's helpful. We talked about that too. Ruby, do you want to share the theater group?
Sure. This was a long list, but like as Pascal said, one of the things that Graciela suggested that we do prepare ahead of time, that's a really good idea to prepare ahead of time. We thought about as you're checking in and getting your ticket, there's opportunities, chatting about the performance, particularly obviously at intermission, choosing a beverage or snack that you want when there's a break, instructions about where the exits are during an emergency, where's my seat, where's the bathroom, asking for a program or the playbill, talking to people you know, also seeing people in the distance going, is that who I think that is? Questions about the show, if it's a concert, will it be loud? Do I need earplugs? Where do I get them? Did you like the show? Asking about how long intermission is, even though it doesn't matter. People never come back until the lights get flickered like 10 times. The socializing at intermission was something we talked about a lot. Questions about the performers. Is this the original cast? Is there time for autographs? Can we get backstage? Might want to prepare the questions ahead of time, sort of anticipating stuff that might come up. And then some of the barriers where, a lot of people, especially at intermission, and people talking all at once and expecting answers right away, might be dark, where you're trying to communicate. So we had a very engaged group. So I hope I caught everything.
And Ruby had a very simple strategy for people who are talking during the performance. It was just using your elbow to get them to quiet down. Okay, great. Can we have the third group, which was the card game, I think?
Sure thing. And I took our notes on a slide, and we are going to go back to our slides in a second. So I'll just put them up. So we decided that we have some big fans of playing Uno. And so we decided to use Uno as our example. And we were really trying to think about some of the things that Pascal was saying about setting up the environment and thinking about our role as communication partners in setting up the environment. So we talked about first, what do we need to do to set up a successful interaction? So we talked about positioning, having access to the communication device if somebody has one. And somebody was saying that their daughter needs the cards tilted up so they can see them and access them. We talked about considering receptive communication and the fact that some people might get overwhelmed by too many instructions or too many verbal instructions all at once. And so we can simplify those if the individual needs them. An important part of Uno is saying that you're down to one card. And so we need to make sure that somebody has a way to say that. And also how to indicate which card they want to play if they're not able to physically manipulate their cards. In terms of the content, the comments and the messages that would be needed, we talked about kind of razzing or teasing. I got you, skip you, whatever, and being able to say that you don't understand or need to ask for more clarification about the rules or how this is supposed to work. We also talked a little bit about the other things that we might be talking about during a card game. So that we don't want to be limited to only messages specific to the game, but we might need to have a way to talk about other things that are going on, as we might if we're hanging out with our friends or our family. And then in terms of just other things that we might need to consider as communication partners, especially if we were helping somebody who didn't know this individual as well, things that if we know them, we might do it automatically, but others might not know, that we might need to allow for more time to process, more consideration of time to wait for a response as well.
Great. I like the razzing. You know, you forget about that playing cards brings out that kind of stuff. People kidding around. Oh, great. Well, these are some really good ideas for those 3 different activities. So if you want to go to the, so this is the end of our first workshop. So we have 3 more coming up in the next couple Thursdays. Next week on May 20th at the same time is understanding communication vulnerability and being an empathetic ally. And Ryan and Grant are going to speak a lot on this topic. We're going to get more into on the 27th, how to be a responsive and supportive communication partner, how to be one, and how to develop them, how to support partners. And the last session will be communication access and support in the digital age, which we talked briefly about earlier during the workshop. So those are the 3 other workshops, and we look for the PowerPoint and both the recording, I believe, are available. I think Donald, is the PowerPoint being sent out or will be sent out?
Yes, I will send a follow-up email after this with a link to the recording and with the PowerPoint slides as well. The PowerPoint was also attached to the email you received twice earlier today, but the recording will be available afterwards.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and we look forward to seeing everyone next week, next Thursday.